Hello and welcome to this tutorial about the powerful library management system of the Behringer Wing digital mixer. I have structured it into 6 different parts, and this is part number 1. With all the parts of this tutorial, I'll walk you through the essential concepts and workflows. I'm using Wing Edit on my laptop, working together with the Wing Rack as the actual mixer. In the first part, I also will show you what the setup is I'm using for my tutorial. And in addition, I will introduce you to a program called Notepad++, which is very helpful when we look directly into the different snap and snip structures. Okay, let's start with the setup of the system. What I do first, I'm initializing Wing Edit. And as well, I go to the mixer and I am initializing the console. There's one thing which does not get initialized, which are the Wing Edit layer here, those 11 Wing Edit layers. You do that by clicking on the sign, selecting the section Wing Edit, and then you say init all, and then also the Wing Edit layers are reset. Now we go to the routing. I will use the microphone on local 1. It's an SEV7, which requires a lot of gain, so I'm turning the gain up. I give it a name and give it an icon and a color. The first 4 channels I will link to the local 1 input. So next, I will turn off the link customization to source, and now I give each of the 4 channels a name, a color and an icon. So we are now done with that. Because my V7 requires some more gain, I will give it an additional trim of 10 dBs. And I copied it over to the channel 2, 3 and 4. And I'm using a scope of in, because that's where the trim is included. And now I set the faders to 0 dB, -5 dB, -10 dB, and -15 dB. Basically, this is only that you can see something as I speak. So next I go to the output, and I want to use the monitors as an output here. And I'm turning up the volume for the main. I have the output set to phone so that I'm not getting any sound back from my monitors. This is again only that you can see something on the screen. In the setup, I have activated the confirm library to load so that you can see whenever I'm loading a library element. And I also set the always show active scene to on so that you can see always what library element was selected, but that's for the next part then. The channel fader meters I keep at the initialized setting here, and for the solo mode I turn to zip. The source solar I choose the aux channels, and so that you can see something in the snapshot files, I'm assigning some effects to the effect slots. Okay, we are done with that. And then I'm saving that as a base snapshot for this tutorial in the Wing Edit Library Management tutorial folder. I will explain that in one of the next parts here. So next we will install a tool called Notepad++. You must know that the library elements like the snap and snip files, but as well the channel and the effects library elements using the JSON format. The JSON is a language independent data format, and it was derived from JavaScript, but many modern programming languages include code to generate and pass JSON format data. So normally it's not easy for you to read it, but by using Notepad++, you can format it in a way that it's easy readable for you. Go to the notepad++org page and select download, and download the last version of Notepad++. So in my case, I take this installer, I get it downloaded, I double click it, Yes, I want to install it. I want to have it in German in my case, yeah. You better choose English when you speak English. Okay, now off it goes, and Notepad++ is installed. So further, we go to plugin management, and we will install 2 plugins. One is the JSON Tools plugin, and another one is the Compare plugin. And we click there on install. So later then, when you open the first file tab, the .snap or .snip file, or any of the other in total 5 file types, then a pop-up will come like that. Just in my case, it's already pre-filled with Notepad++. In your case, you go to the bottom, you say select an app on your computer, it opens the program folder, and then you scroll down to Notepad++, double click it, and then you select notepad++.exe and click on open. So now we can begin. Let's jump to the library page. And before I will explain any of those buttons and functions, I will go in detail about scope. So what is a scope? The mixer has in total about, let's say, 30,000 parameters, which cover all settings the mixer needs to do your mixing. The channel settings, the bus settings, the monitor setup, every parameter you can think of has to be saved somewhere, except for some, and I will go through that. So since you can imagine that you cannot go and choose which one of those 28,000 parameters should get saved, that is why they're grouped together into scopes. Yeah, so let's see what we find on the scope page. That's the same page here when you say save plus scope, or when you have already an existing snap, you get with edit scope, or with partial update, partial load, and the same thing on the snip file with add items or recording focus, and as well with global. So it's not only on the library management page that you find those scopes, it's also on the setup page when you click Init Console, and then as well on the Init Channel page. This is where you find the content scope here, and on the channel copy you find the content scope, and as well on the channel, and I will go through that in one of my next parts. But for now, just to show you that, I'm saving it, and when I click it, then you also find here the content scope. So on all those buttons, you will get such a scope panel presented: partial update, partial load, edit scope, and on the snip, recording focus, add items, and the globals. Yeah, which looks a little bit different. So it's very essential to understand what is covered by scope. So that is the scope panel zoomed in, and what you see here is you have, let's call them different kind of mixer elements: the channels, the auxes, the buses, mains, matrices, sources, outputs, DCAs, mute groups, and effects. Then in addition, you find here the configuration group and here the contents group. Behind each of those scopes, you will have a set of parameters. But in total, the mixer has about 30,000 parameters, and nearly all of them you can select here by the scope. But there are just some others you do not catch by those scope groups. So you could say a scope is a number of parameters you're selecting in a group. But then there are others you cannot select by using the scopes here. So there is a number of parameters which are never saved on the mixer. We will go through those. And then there's a number of parameters, at least for the snaps, which are always saved. So it doesn't matter what scope you select, those parameters will get always saved in the snap file. And then we have down here the globals. This is just a mock-up for my tutorial. And the globals you select here on the top with the global button, and this is where you can select the scope of those attributes, which are never to be overwritten. So those are the group of parameters which are never to be loaded into the mixer, so you don't override certain settings. So the scope buttons here, when you select all, plus the never parameters, plus the always parameters, plus the global parameters, they represent those about 30,000 parameters of the mixer. That's all you have in the Wing machines. So what is it that you see on the scope panel? You have here mixer elements which definitely do require the contents box. It's important that you know that, and they share it. So when you select here the channels and auxes and buses and mains and matrices and DCAs and mute groups, then they will share the content you select, even so that they have slightly different parameters behind each of those content boxes. And that is why we in detail will go through that you exactly understand what you're doing. And then you also have those mixer elements like sources, outputs and effects and configuration, which do not require the content selection. So whatever you select there, it's completely independent on what you have selected in the contents box. And for that purpose, we are navigating to the folder which I have selected to store my library management elements, which again I will in detail explain in the next parts. So you see here the exclamation mark base snapshot, and here you see the exclamation mark base snap file. When I double click that, because I have associated it with Notepad++, it will open it up here. And as you see, this is a very long string with quotes and commas and double dots and so on, so this is nothing you easily could read. And now in the JS tool you see here, JS format, Control Alternate M. That is the shortcut I'm selecting now. And you see here all this, again about 30,000 parameters. Don't get puzzled that the line number is much higher, because you have all those structures elements included in here, and like monitor and channels and whatsoever, and they do not count. So we speak when we speak about a parameter, we speak about the pure parameter here and not about the structure, how that file is organized. When I click now Alternate 0 and Alternate Shift 2, I close the structure here and then I open it up to the second level, so that you can get a good overview about what is in such a snap file. And you have these different sections, the configuration section here with the solar RTA, meter, torque, and auto mix setup or the layer setup, the user setup, GPO, save, store, MIDI, or whatever setting here. I will go now to a chart I created to again show all the parameters and go through in detail where you find them as well on the Wing Edit, as well then on the Wing Rack screens. Yeah? So that's how the snap file looks like. So I took this Notepad++ structure here, this overview structure, and I have added some columns, and especially I have added the second page, all those parameters which are not saved. So maybe we start with that first. Let's zoom into that. Those are the parameters which are not saved in the snap or snip or the other three element types here. So we quickly go through that list. It's the DIM, the mono, the torque A and B settings on the monitor page. DIM, the mono, and the torque A, torque B button here, which you as well find in Wing Edit on the right side. On the rack itself, you must go to Setup, Monitors, and then you find here the DIM, the mono, and the torque A, torque B button here. the console name and the USB host speed, which is on the general panel. In Wing Edit, you anyhow cannot set the console name, you only can see it. So you see here the console name, or you see it here in the overview of the console name. And then we had the USB host speed on the channel panel, and on the Wing rack itself you have here the console name. You can enter as well the USB host speed on the right button. Then is of course the clock, the network setting, and the remote lock TCP. So you do not find that at all in Wing Edit. You only find that here on the remote page on the Wing rack. So here's the network, and here as well is the TCP log, and on the channel page there is the time setting as well as the date setting, which are not saved, of course, in the snap file. The headphone, talk, and monitor level, whenever you don't have a knob for that. So in my case, I have a Wing rack. That is why I only have a knob for the headphone level, but I have a page where I can set the talk and the monitor level. So, and that is then saved as well. When I go to monitor, then you have here the talk level, and for the speakers, the speakers monitor level, which I have here as well. And on the Wing rack, I have here the speakers level. Again, the phones level I cannot move. And then I have the talk level when I'm turning the knob then on the right side. And there are a number of parameters in Wing Edit which are not saved at all. So I'm going to those pages here. On the Setup General page, you have here the complete section which says Operation Wing Edit, with the confirm library load, always show active scene, CC tab tempo flash, soft frame, show bus, sense button names, enable mouse wheel, touch and hold edit, restore Windows at startup. That is not saved. As well, on the right side, beside the USB host speed we already mentioned, the link mixer channel plus screen, on the channel strip, fader mode fine, disconnect warning, and the gray colors, the gamma level for the screen itself. That is not saved. So those 4 parameters I will explain when we go through the surface scope, but I just already mentioned it here. They do not get saved, so the Wing Edit values never get saved. But what happens here is that when you set them on the Wing rack, on the console, then those parameters get saved. But when you load them in Wing Edit, then they get loaded as well into Wing Edit, and not only to the console. So that is a special thing here. On the screen, when you change them, then they do not change on the Wing rack. And when I go on, off on each of those parameters, then you see that nothing is changing. But when I'm setting them, and when I save that now, and I say this is on the rack, and I'm loading that now, and I go here, you see they're on as well in Wing Edit. But when I set them on in Wing Edit, and say on Wing Edit, and now I turn them off, and I load them, they are not loaded. I know because they are not saved when I look into their snap file. But when I take the on rack, they get loaded. And then something exotic, I believe it's maybe an overlook, but on the equalizer page, you find here the setting for the RTA, how the RTA is to be displayed. So those settings get all saved, but the size mode and the color is not saved currently in the snap or snip file. So now we have a look at the parameters which are always saved. So this doesn't matter which scope you select for snap, they're always saved. And the first group are never saved as a snip. So since it doesn't have a scope selection, when you use the add items function, there is no scope which covers those parameters here. So what are those parameters here? It's the main old switch and the global input select override switch. For the player, the repeat setting. For the recorder, the resolution and the number of channels. And then the way how the two GPIO switches do work. And the global switch are called sometimes saves here as well. So those parameters are always saved. Let's go and find them on the panels. So on the setup general panel, you have here the main old switch. As well here, the global input select override. On the wing rack, you find the input select override as well on the setup audio page. And here you have the global input select override switch. By the way, in my case, I want to turn it off. And because I turned it off, I will update my setting here. I also could have saved it and overwritten that setting. Then the player repeat setting, which is on the player in the middle. And here for the recorder, the number of channels and the bits you want to use for your recording. And on the wing rack, you need to first open a playlist that you can see the repeat. So here you have the repeat button, and then for the recorder you have the channel and the bit selection. The GPIO settings you find under CC Edit, GPIO, and here for each of the 4 GPIOs you can select the toggle normal open, normally closed, and the other 4 settings here. On the wing rack, you do that by setup, CC Edit, GPIO. Then you find for the 4 GPIOs how they operate. They are also always saved. But what does it mean when something is always saved in a snap and you don't have a scope to choose so that you can load it because it's not part of that scope? That is why you have the restore button. The restore button will ignore the scope setting and load all parameters, also those which do not have a scope setting. Then we have those parameters which are the same, always saved for snaps and only restored when you, and only loaded when you restore them. So then we have those 11 parameters because there are 3 each behind those 2 groups. And those 11 parameters, they get saved always when you click save, but only loaded when you click restore. But the exception is for a snip. When you use the config scope, then they are saved with the config scope and also loaded with it, because there is no restore on the snip panel. And you must also understand that those parameters which are always saved, you can't update them because they are not part of the scope. The only thing you can do when you change some of those parameters, you need to resave the file and overwrite the file. So now, when I take, for example, the global setting here, which I forgot to cover before, so because there's also the saves, the library globals, and when I'm changing those, and you say, I never want to overwrite my first 4 channels, for example, and now we go to the saves area, and you see that the saves area here is empty also for the channels, because I have not overwritten it yet. I have those 4 channels saved, but I didn't click save now. So I need to click save to overwrite it, or save plus scope. It doesn't matter, one of both. I also could go and delete that and save it new. That would be the same like overwriting it. So now I'm overwriting it. I'm reopening it in Notepad++. I go to the save sections, and now you see that the scope for the first 4 channels was marked here with pluses. So that is something which is essential here to understand, that those always parameters, you need to go and hit save or save plus scope, or delete them and save them new. Yeah, make a new save with it. That is as well true for the snaps, for those parameters here. But in the snip, when you then go to the snip and have the add items and you click here config, then they will normally get saved and you can load them. So that's a little bit an inconsistency you please must be aware of, especially those are kind of critical parameters. So where do you find them? The clock rate and the sync and the startup mute and the USB configuration you find on the setup audio panel here. So here is the clock rate, the sync source setting, the startup main mute, and the USB setting if you want to have 2, 8, 16, 32 or 48 channels. On the wing rack you have that as well on the audio page, the clock rate, the sync settings, the USB audio and the startup main mute. Then you have the very hidden stage connect setting and the header and remote and customization sync on the remote page. So where do we find the stage connect setting? Under routing, inputs, and then you select stage connect, and that is the parameter which is meant by that. So this is also one of the parameters. They're always saved, but only saved when you click save, save plus scope, or make a new save, and are only loaded when you click restore. And on the wing rack you find them under inputs and stage connect. Here is this parameter, and then as well the remote setting, which is then here on the same page. So that's all about the always setting, but since there are also critical parameters in there, that is why I spend a lot of time to make it very clear how you get them saved and how you get them loaded. Okay, what's next? So now we can start with the configuration box, and let's have a look into the parameters which are behind the scope config. The parameters saved by the config scope, they are a little bit distributed over the snap file. You find them here in the audio engine section, then below there is also a group, and then again the snip config, which I mentioned before, which are saved with the snip but are always saved as a snap. So parameters saved when you select the scope config are the main link and the DCA mute group. So you find them on Wing Edit and the setup audio page, the main link and the DCA mute groups. As well on the wing rack you find here the main link and the DCA mute group setting. Then all parameters of the monitor page. So you have the phone setting and the speaker setting, which are all saved, including the EQ, everything you can set here on that panel, which you find on the wing rack under the monitor section here. Then the solo setting on the audio page, so all the solo settings here, except for the talkback selection. So I have here the solo system, and I do not speak about those parameters, just those plus the source solo selection here. The RTS settings, so that's a little bit tricky, the RTS settings here. The RTS settings you find in Wing Edit, and on the equalizer when you click on the setting sign here. And as I explained before, those two parameters are not saved, but those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parameters are saved when you select the config scope for the Wing Edit. And now there comes something which is a little bit difficult to explain, but I try to explain that. On the Wing rack you have 3 different kind of RTS settings. One, when you're here on the preview on the home panel, so then you can click settings, then when you are on the equalizer, and then you can click settings here. And then there is a last one which you might not be aware of. On the filter page you also have a setting for the RTA. So what is those three settings have in common but are different from the wing edit settings? Because the RTA wing edit settings and the RTA on the console settings have nothing in common. So here you have the range, the decay, the detector, and the auto gain and the fixed gain. Those are the ones which are shared between those three pages. While in the overview panel, you save here the RTA source as well as the size, mode and color of the home RTA equalizer setting, as well the RTA source and size, mode and color of the equalizer RTA setting, which are different from those of the home RTA equalizer setting. And then the filter RTA setting, where the size, mode and color are the same like the RTA settings for the equalizer RTA setting, but the RTA source can be different. So they are all saved then under the surface mode. This is a little bit, might be confusing, but just that you understand that this is what the situation is. Yeah? Hopefully I could make that clear. That is why you find here in the wing edit column that the RTA is in the EQ settings, and here you find it on the console in the home settings. So the meter parameters we find on the setup general page under meters, except for the reduced meter update rate, which is never saved. And then as well on the meter page when you open the settings. And on the wing rack we find the meter parameters here on the setup surface page, and then as well under meters in the setting dialog. The torque settings, which you find in wing edit on the left side of the monitor selection, and here the same under setup monitor. The complete torque A and torque B setting, plus the torque back setting here. Then the auto mix, which you find on the setup audio page on the right side, as well as here the auto mix, and the SD card player recorder settings. So you go to SD card and click here on the settings page how if the main and old should be automized, and then not to forget when you click on those right arrows on the top, then you get here the settings for the number of channels you want to record with the player, as well as what the play mode is here, and the same you have then for the second player on the left side. When you have linked your cards, then you only get one of these right arrows then. Then you can choose here between card 1 and card 2. So that's also under the config. And now I have those which I already mentioned under always, but I can't mention it often enough. For the snap, the scope config does not care about those parameters, but for the snip, and I've gone through that already where you find them, it's just mentioned for completeness. They are saved in the snip. So be careful about those, especially there the clock rate is included. In case you do some CD recordings and live, don't mix that up in the snip when you use snips. Yeah? So next is the surface configuration scope. And when we go now to my chart and check out where I find the surface, you only have one line here. So now the surface scope has for wing edit only two parameters which are saved and loaded, which is the mute group zip override, and then as well the selection of what is shown in the master fader. So on the setup audio page you find the mute group zip override, And then you find as well here on the right side the selection of the bus you want to see here in your master fader on the right side. So what do we have here on the console? The lights are saved under the surface scope. Then we have this RTA behavior. I already explained under the config scope, but because it's a little bit complicated, I repeat it here. The RTA setting from Wing Edit is completely saved under the config scope, except for the size mode and the color, which is never saved. But then on the Wing Rec, and I assume it's the same on any of the other two consoles, I have different RTA settings. One is on the home page. So the RTA settings of the console, the RTA range, RTA decay, detector and auto gain, that is saved under the config scope. But the RTA source, the size mode and the color is saved under the surface scope. And when you go to the equalizer and then go to the RTA settings, then you have a separate RTA source and size mode and color. That is saved as well on the surface scope, but it's not the same like on the home EQ RTA setting. And when you go to the filter and say setting, then the RTA source is as well an extra setting, while the RTA range, decay, detector, auto gain is the same like for the other three RTA settings. And the size mode and color is the same like on the EQ RTA setting. We have 4 exotic ones, and I will explain that now. We have those 4 parameters here: the exclusive solo, the solo follow select, the select follow solo, and the bus soft activate solo. I have, as you saw it before, have put them into the never saved group, but they get loaded, but only when set by the Wing Rec. So, and then when I go further down on the console side, we have the auto select rec parameter. Then we have the auto select rec. That is on the setup surface tab, which is here the channel auto select. And what it does, when I go to input, then you can see here when I touch the first channel on the rec, then it auto selects it on the virtual, the third one, the fourth one, and so on. So that is what this auto select does. And when I turn it off and I'm touching the knobs here, then nothing happens. And then the select double click bus FX. And on the setup surface page, you also find the cell select double click off home or bus FX. Really don't know what that is. Okay, I believe that's all about the surface scope now. The surface we covered, and now we're coming to the preference. So let's have a look at those details here. So here we are. Those are all the attributes which are behind the preference scope selection. And you see again on the Wing Edit, there's basically none. There is a file sort, which I believe was thought to cover here this file sort on the library panel, but its value never changes. So I just listed it here for completion reasons. So let's start with the Wing Rec. On the remote page, there we find the MIDI remote control and then the door control. In the right lower corner of the setup channel page, I have this touch fader select, touch fader resolution, mouse disables touch, mouse speed. Those 4 parameters. And as well, I have the confirm library load, the show meters, page when logged, and always show active scene. Those 3 parameters here as well. And then it will save the time format you have selected and the date format you have selected. As well on the audio page, The tap tempo flash shows source and scribble, and the select double click. They have now 2 further left of the configuration selection. So those are the layers, in this case the wing edit layers. The left, right, the left, center, right of the full size. The compact layers, the rack surface layers, the external layers, and the virtual layers of the rack. So they are all saved. You know you have them here. You can assign them via the assign function. You also can configure their full size, the compact, as well as all their rack layers, as well as the wing edit layers. And this whole configuration here, for example, like for the wing edit, the whole 96 positions here for all the 11 layer levels here, and the same thing for the left, center, right. Those are all saved by the selection behind the wing edit, LCR, compact, rack, external, virtual scope. There's a big difference you need to be aware of. When I go to the wing rack and I go to the scope panel, look in the right upper corner here of the configuration box. There is no wing edit layer selection here. So this means that whatever you save by the console, it does not contain the wing edit layers. So when you would have a round trip, you have a wing edit layer which you copy to the console and you override it with save, then the wing edit layer information gets lost. So that when you copy that back to your computer, then you don't have any wing edit layers settings anymore available. So it's very important for you to know. So that covered this wing edit, LCR, compact, rack, external, virtual selection here. So what's now left after configuration section is the CC layers here. So it's there. When you click on CC, what you find here, you have the GPIO setting for the 4 GPIO foot switches, and then the user setting, I believe that is for the full size, the door 1, door 2, door 3, door 4. Then the 16 CC layers, their custom controls, as well as the custom controls for the compact. We can have a look at that. What you're saving here is basically what you see here. GPIO, user layer, layer 1 to 16, user 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 to 12, 13 to 16, main matrix 5 to 8, and DCA 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 to 12, 13 to 16. Everything you configured here will be saved, except, as you know, for the GPIO, those are always saved and only loaded by restore, the base settings. The CC section you find on the setup, and CC edit then. That's a setting which is always saved and only loaded when it's restored, and all the other settings. Those are all the other settings here. Now we are through with the whole configuration scope selection. So now next I want to cover those elements which do not require any content selection here, which is the source section. That is an easy one. For all the sources, there's some parameters which are always saved, which is the mono stereo, mid-size, polarity mute, name, icon, color, and tag, so the customization. For all the input sources saved in the source scope selection. And there are 3 exceptions. For the source locals, you also have the preamp info, the gain, the 48 volt, the remote and receive customization. And for the user patches and signals, you have some extra parameters. And for the oscillator input sources. So just to have a quick look on that. I mean, you will perfectly know that. So for the locals as well as for the other digital stage boxes having a preamp, the AS50A, B, and C, you have, in addition to the customization selection and in addition to the input type mono stereo mid-side, as well the remote setting and the mute, you have here the preamp setting as well, the stage connect, for example. does not have that because it doesn't have a preamp. The oscillator has instead the level, the frequency, and the type of oscillator and the user signal. And for the user signal, you have here the source group you want to feed into the user signal, as well as the tap point of it, and if it's the left plus right or just one side of the stereo channel. And for the user patch, you have the source group you feed into, but no, of course, no tap point for that, because it's a straight to source, yeah? Okay, by that we have covered the sources here. Now we come to the output, which is even simpler with the parameters than the sources. So all the outputs have only two parameters, which is the output group and the group number. That's what it is, and that is saved in the snap file. So let's go there. For each of the outputs, you're selecting what is the output group, and then you select which of the outputs of the output groups is to be selected, and this is what's then stored in the snap file for the outputs. So now there's only one left which does not require the contents box. So when you select the effects, then the effects parameters are saved. All the effect parameters you can set here on the channel or bus or matrix or main. That is what is then saved in the file. So in this case, I just go directly into the snap file. You know that each effect has very individual parameters. You know, I have loaded in my setup all the 16 effect slots. And so you see now all the effect parameters in the snap file, and of course then also in the snip file when you have selected, or in the effect file. Yeah. So the important thing you know is when you have selected an effect for a channel or bus or for the main and whatever, and you're changing those parameters, then you must save the effect. So when you change a parameter for the effects, you must have the effect scope selected so that it gets saved or updated. So this might a little bit puzzle you, but it's easier than you think. And this is just something I say upfront because I was covering the FXs now. Which effect a channel or aux or bus or main or matrix is using, that is decided here by the content selection insert 1 and insert 2, but it does not contain the parameters. So if you're using the 16 effects and you always want to save them, then this is the way how you need to save your channels and auxes and buses and mains and matrices. That when you need the link to the effect rec as well as the parameters, you must select the FX section here. Beside the scope, the globals, the only thing left over are here the mixer elements which require the contents box. So all these different mixer elements are sharing the same content selection, but there are different parameters behind those scopes. I've prepared that spreadsheet for you. Let's start with the customization content. So for the channel, aux, channels, buses, matrices, mains, DCAs, and mute groups, always the customization, the color, the name, the icon, the LED is saved. For the mute group, it's only the name. It doesn't have a color, an icon, and LED. But for the channel and the aux channels, there's in addition the source link saved as well. This is what I have turned off here, the link customization to source. The tag selection, only the channel, the aux channels, bus, matrix, main have tags. So for those mix elements, exclude or include the tag selection. That is a little bit tricky when you see that here. So like for example, I want immediately to make an example, even so that I go in detail with one of the next parts. to all those. So in one of the next parts, I will make a lot of examples using then all these library element controls here. Because I speak about the tags, there's one important thing. When I, for example, go to the DC again, and I would select the headphones or the speaker, and I'm saving that snapshot here, and I would go to the, and I go now to the DCA element, DCA1, then you see it doesn't have a tag, because it's exactly as I described it, that the DCA does not have a tag. So where that is really saved, this is saved with the configuration element and the monitor setting, and here for monitor 1 and monitor 2 you are finding the tag. So in this case you need to select the configuration scope as well. So in case you would like to save the customization for a DCA, but also keep the information which monitor you have selected, the headphones or the monitors, then you also need to choose the configuration scope here. Okay, let's go further. The connection. Only the channel and the aux channels have their connection information, and you see here there are two attributes marked blue, and the same attributes are marked here for the inbox red. So what is here the difference? For the scope CONN, in the snap, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 parameters are behind the CONN content scope. But if you then go to the snip and make an add item, and you select also the CONN content scope to be saved, they are not included. So for the snap scope, it's those 6 parameters here, but for the snip scope, it's only those 4 parameters. I will show you when I do my examples in one of the next parts here. So that's now, of course, the opposite around with the input selection here. So the in means invert trim balance for all the other elements like channel, aux, bus, matrix, main, with the only exception of the matrix, where also the direct input selection is part of that scope selection. But, so as I explained before for the CONN scope, for the snaps, only invert trim balance is loaded when you have the in content scope selected. But for a snip, it will contain the main old individual global, so that gets loaded when you and saved when you select the in. That's a little bit irritating. I have raised on the Behringer idea a question to ask if that is designed or is maybe a smally which could be changed. Yeah. So I will go now to the channel, and I go to the second detail page. So you say here you have the trim and the balance and the invert. While for the snip, when you have selected in, it's also the parameters main old and the input select individual global saved here. When you are then with the bus, it's the same thing. With the main, but with the matrix, you also have here the direct input. So we covered the next element, which is the filter content scope. That exists only for the channel, and all those parameters you find here of the channel filter panel. The delay scope setting, channel, aux, bus, matrix, mains have a delay setting, and so you find it here, the meters or feet or milliseconds or samples, and the on-off button of the delay. For the aux, as well for the bus, as well for the mains, where you have it on a different panel here, and for the matrix. Then we have the gate, the compressor, the selected effect rack for the first effect insert, then the effect rack for the second one, the equalizer, and the pan. So the gate, only the channel has a gate. The aux channels don't have a gate. It's assumed that they have a line level input. So when we go to the gate, all those parameters, all this, the selected kind of gate, the key source, as well as the key filter for the key source. That's part of the channel gate scope selection. You see the aux channel as well as the buses and the mains and the matrix. They don't have a gate available. That's the compressor. For the channel, bus, matrix and main save all the same kind of parameters except for the aux channel, which does not have a compressor and also not a compressor selection like the other elements, but it has one fixed combined effect. So we go to the channel, go to the compressor. You know that you have all those compressors available. You have the crossover mode and the compressor key filter and the source. And this is the same for the buses and for the main and for the matrix. The only exception are the auxes, the aux channels, which only have this combined source extractor PSE 545 and their leveling amplifier model 2A available. For the insert effects, I already mentioned that in combination with the effect rack selection to save the parameters. This is only saving the link to the rack. So when I'm selecting now for the channel 1 an effect, or from the effect rack, go to the library and say update, and look in the updated reloaded file, snap file, and I go to channel 1 and I'm selecting the pre-insert effect. You see here only the information that the effect is turned on and we are using effect rack 1. That's the same information for the insert 2, except that the aux channel does not have a second effect insert. And for the channels, you can also select an auto mix, and that is then saved as well. When I select the second insert, here you have the auto mix, or you're selecting an effect rack. That is the information which is saved then in the snap file. So when now I look into the channel 1 post insert parameter section, then you have here the information about the auto mix saved. So then we have the equalizer. You know, we have these two different type of equalizers here. It's 2.5 different type of equalizers. The channel has a 4+1 equalizer, so for the first and last one, then number 1 and number 6, you can select if it's a parametric point or a shelving. For the aux, you can in addition select if it is a high-low cut. And the buses, since they do not have a filter selection, have that built into their first and last. So the first they have a 6+2 equalizer, and second, you can not only select for the first and the 8th one if it's parametric shelving or cut, but you also can select the Butterworth and the Link-Rayleigh and the tilt filter function. So let's have a quick look at that. So when I go to the filter and the equalizer, then this is where you can configure your first and 6th one. And when I go to the aux, then in addition can select the high cut, low cut. And when you go to the bus, then in addition you can select, have all those other options available, which is then the same for the mains and for the matrices. Then we have the pan. The pan is simple and is the same for all the elements, channel, aux, bus, matrix and main. So we are here at the panel with the pan, and the pan saves also the width. So we have pan and width here. For the aux, for the buses, for the mains, and for the matrices. It looks all the same here. So we're nearly at the end. We have the main sense. So only the channel, the aux channels and the buses can send to the main. And you also have the tap pointer pre or post selection here. Let's have a quick look into that. I go to the main sense. So you have here the level on, off, pre, post, and you have that as well for the bus, and you have that for the aux channels. And of course you do not have that for the mains. The main can't send to itself, and for the matrices as well, this does not exist. So now here with the sense, let's first cover the bus sense, which is slightly different from the matrix sense. So the channel, the auxes and the buses can send to a bus, but for the channels and auxes you have the paneling and the pan itself for the bus send that you can choose. Let's go there, click a second time, I come to the bus, and here you have the pan and the link send to pan information, as well as then the mode tap point post group that you can select for the channel as well as for the aux. That's the same thing. And for the bus, to bus send, you only have the on, off, the level and the pre-post. For the matrix send, it's exactly the same thing for the channel, aux and buses, but you also have the settings for the main, because a main can be sent to a matrix. So we are checking that out here. We are here on the matrix side, the same thing like for the aux as well, the same thing. For the bus, we only can select pre-post, and then for the main, you have here the same setting now, because a main can be sent to a matrix. Matrix, of course, doesn't have that. You cannot send the matrix to a matrix. So the FADER+MUTE are really simple things. All elements beside the mute group has a level, and the mute, every element has the mute. So the last content scope selection is the config. So let's see what the parameters are behind that. So what is the same for the channel, aux channel, buses, matrix, mains is the monitor and headphone selection. Let's have a quick look at that, because those parameters are depending on what the solo mode is that you have selected. So you have here the monitor headphone selection for those 5 elements, but then on the channel and aux channel have a solo save, and let's see how that looks like, those two things. So I have shown you at the beginning, I'm currently at the solo mode zip. So you find here the solo save on the channel and as well on the aux channel, but you find nothing on the bus, on the main and the matrix. But when I'm changing that now to live, so when I select live and I go to the channel, you find here the solo bus selection here. That's the same for the aux, but also for the bus, for the main and the matrix. So that depends on the solo setting. And by the way, when you're at studio, then you have nothing there. So studio, neither the channel nor the aux, nor the bus, nor the mains or the matrices. You can then select everything, which is obvious why that is the case. I put it back again to zip. But now you can set only for the channel the processing sequence and the tap point. As you know, here by clicking on the wrench, you can shift around your processing sequence as well as the tap point. That is a very nice feature here. And for the others, you don't have that. So for the aux channels and for the buses, you cannot configure the processing sequence. Neither you can choose the tap point. There's a fixed tap point here. Yeah, that's the special thing with channel. And so for the bus, the matrix and the main, you also can set them to mono. So the mono parameter you only find here for the bus, the main, as well as the matrix here. You don't have that available for the channel nor for the aux channel. Yeah. So I believe you're through that. Just to mention with the DCA, that's maybe just a leftover. There's a parameter which to my research doesn't do anything. Yeah. So that's maybe the last thing I want to show you. The last leftover here. When we go now to this total overview, we have now covered all the parameters. The only parameters left over are the scope parameters. I remarked here, with the snap, this section exists when you make with the snap save plus scope. When you only click save, then the section is empty, but it means the same thing like you would make save plus scope and select all scopes. Then when you edit the scope, and then click update, the scope gets respected whenever you do a snap load, or when you use the show control, the snap go, or the update function, then the scope is used for the snaps. So maybe I quickly show you that when I just select now the first 8 channels, but I select the all content and I select config service preferences and I click update and I load my base snap again and look to the scope section. Then you see here the scope selection, the setup, which is meant with the configuration, and then the contents, because I've selected all the contents with all the main sense and all the bus sense. So that is always then updated in here. Maybe I just wanted to make you aware of that the scope, which looks similar to the globals, is always saved with update. But when you have global here, you don't have an update button, which irritates me a little bit. So you cannot update just the globals, which would be on my wish list. But you need to save it whenever you have changed the scope and overwrite the existing one. Now the new global gets saved, which I already have shown to you. Okay, so in the next part, we will cover in detail the right side here, as well as some of the edit functions on the left side. So that will be the content of the next tutorial part for the library management system. Okay, bye.